So good morning, everybody. For those who are new to our Represent Breakfast Briefings, I'm Christine Jacobs, and I'm the Executive Director of Represent PA. We're a PAC that raises money, and we call it Powering Progressive Women in Harrisburg. We raise money and invest in pro-choice women who are running for the state legislature. Next slide. We're really happy to be talking about voting today. And this has been a big issue on a national basis. It's being discussed, and in Pennsylvania, it's being discussed. And what we thought we'd do is have a conversation with two incredibly smart, capable women who've been part of this whole process for us, both in Harrisburg and regionally. Margot Davidson is the Democratic Minority Chair of the State Government Committee and Chair of the Women's Caucus in our state legislature. She is really on the forefront of working hard for us to change what's going on and change the arguments about what's happening in voting rights in Pennsylvania. And Nancy Kleinberg is a known activist. She's done Indivisible. She's in all the calls, all the everything. Every time I think of a subject going on in Southeast Pennsylvania or Pennsylvania in general, Nancy's been on call and analyzed what's going on. So we're really happy to have her voice in this discussion today also. I wanted to start though with just a little bit of something we finished with in our last call. If you were on our last call or have seen some of our emails recently, you know that during Women's History Month in March, we had two very generous donors who agreed to a 2-for-1 match on donations in March, new donations, new money, up to $10,000, and we made our goal. We're now growing our 2021-22 investment fund. We, as most of you know, we invested $500,000 in the last cycle in these races for Harrisburg, and we're well on our way to be able to do a similar investment in 2022. So thank you all. Thank you all. Okay, does anybody not know that voting rights are under fire in the United States? I was kind of interested to see this weekend reporting that some 70 companies or so had a Zoom call this weekend to talk about what companies should do in terms of how they should they be investing in candidates who are trying to make it harder to vote? Should they be investing, what should they be doing with their PAC money? How should they position this? And I really liked it because they're all talking together, which means they're trying to even the playing field. So it's not this company doing this and this company doing this, and then all of kinds of issues. So it's a nice discussion to have. And as you all know, in response to Democratic victories in 2020, in particular in Georgia, Republican state legislatures across the United States are making it harder to vote. And guess what? No one's ever surprised to hear that Pennsylvania is one of those states. We're hoping that federal laws and HR 1 or Senate 1 will maybe change things, and then we hear that the filibuster may prevent any changes in the laws. These are very aggressive laws. We'll see what happens. The only difference between Pennsylvania and Georgia sometimes is that we have a Democratic governor. And I often refer to Tom Wolf as Governor Veto, because without his veto pen and without having a Democratic governor, we'd be in the same state that Georgia is. And through our work and the work of many other Democratic activists in the state, the Republicans do not have a veto-proof majority in either the House or the Senate. So we're in slightly better shape, but that doesn't mean they're not working at it. And that doesn't mean there aren't going to be more lawsuits. And that doesn't mean this isn't going to be a big issue for all of us in 2022. So what we thought we would do is take you on a little history lesson. We're going to have a conversation today with our two special guests. I view this to be a morality play in 3 acts. The first is we'll talk about what happened in 2019. What was Act 77? What were the issues around getting it passed? And what concessions were made and why was it done and how did we feel coming out of it. Then we'll talk a little bit about the 2020 election and how much time, well, we can talk about how much time and money was spent in lawsuits, and how your tax dollars were spent and all the complaints and all the issues that came up in the 2020 election. And then we'll talk about what's going on in 2021 and 2022 and what kind of battles Margot is facing in the state legislature and what kind of things are activists doing. So that's our plan for today. And let's take Act 1. Act 1 is in 2019, there was a voting reform bill, Act 77. So Margot and Nancy, how did it come to be? Whose idea was it? And what were the discussions about putting Act 77 into being?
Well, Act 77 was really a sea change in voting and procedures in Pennsylvania. There hadn't been a real overhaul of voting procedures since 1937. So it was really a significant change. It really was a...
Thank you.
There really was a compromise agreement between the Wolf administration and the Republican-controlled legislature. I like to say the gerrymandered Republican majority, which they hate me saying. So
I hate you saying it, so you've got to keep saying it because
exactly. But so the Republican majority did not execute all of what was supposed to be the compromise agreement, because early canvassing was a part of it, but that never did make it through, even though we tried again closer to the election to put forward early pre-canvassing. The voting, early voting.
Pre-canvassing means opening up the ballots before election day. Is that what you're referring to?
You're not actually counting votes. You're actually counting the number of voters that have voted, and doing the pre-work that usually election officials do at the poll. So they don't just count to see, who won. There's a whole process of counting how many voters came out, determining, the percentage of Democrats, checking that against undervotes in terms of who voted at the top but didn't vote at the bottom. So you have all the numbers should match in terms of the numbers of people that voted, the votes that were actually cast in the machine, as well as some other administrative endeavors. So that is the work that they would do. So the security, the secret envelope, the security envelope would not be open, but the outer envelope would be open and the preliminary work would be done. So it wouldn't take as long administratively to have the final results. So we as Democrats thought that was important. The Republicans decided that they thought that counting of any kind should not begin until election day. And some county officials took that to mean at the end of election day. So you had some county officials that started counting earlier in the day, the pre-counting, the pre-canvassing, and others that did not start until the end of the election day, and some that didn't start counting at all until the day after. So after election day. So, which created chaos in the system. We don't have a certified election on election day. So people should understand that has never happened. It's usually 2 weeks later. However, we have an indication from pre-canvassing, from early returns, unofficial returns, what the results are. So we had nothing in Pennsylvania on that day. And so, but we did have mail-in voting, which was, a step forward. I didn't support the bill because I knew that communities of color and marginalized communities were mistrustful of the mail system. And we all had a reason to be mistrustful in the current environment. And so I was really concerned that there would be, there would be a downturn in the election results in terms of turnout in communities of color and Democratic strongholds. But with the drop boxes, with which the Republicans fought against, we saw a lot of people voting in person through the mail-in system, which was really great. So we saw a lot of people having the confidence that their vote would be counted by being able to put them in drop boxes or taking them to the county election offices.
Thank you. Nancy, what was the discussion around the one touch and the straight party voting?
Well, not being a member of the legislature, I wasn't in on any of that, but I first heard about this bill. Senator Art Haywood invited people to his home, and it was sometime in December that I went to his house. And remember, this is before COVID. Well, it's before we knew about COVID. And I was surprised. And at first, I was sorry that they passed it. I wanted them to have waited till after the election because I was upset about the lack of straight party voting. I felt like that would hurt the down ballot candidate whom I really wanted to win. As it turned out, it's really a good thing that we did pass it because of COVID. And I guess I just want to say that people were very frustrated about the mail-in ballots. You had to wait so long to see if, to get your ballot and to see it registered and feel confident that you voted. But we really weren't, when this got passed, most of the time when mail-in ballots get to be part of how you vote, it's a slow process and the counties and the state have some time to prepare. This time, it was extremely difficult because instead of getting tens of thousands, they got hundreds of thousands and they weren't prepared. And I guess I just want to say one other thing. The election, the odd year elections make such a difference because in the case of this bill, the counties, as Margot said, had a lot of control over how they handled things. And for example, in Delaware County, our taking over the county council meant that they got to decide things like how many drop boxes, and they could make voting, who ran the county could make voting easier or harder. So what we do in the very local elections has a big effect on what happens in other elections.
Well, Nancy, I love the fact that you snuck in the commercial for why 2021 elections are so important. I think that is, you did that very subtly. It was a good one, but so accurately. Margot, as part of your not being fond of not supporting the 2019 Act 77, was part of it the elimination of the straight party ticketing? Was that one of your concerns?
It was. So I'm glad Nancy brought that up because that was also a concern, because that is also a way that Democratic voters in Democratic strongholds traditionally voted straight party ticket, particularly communities of color and poorer communities. It's just easier and faster. And, these are folks that work long hours for lower pay. And, they want to get in and out. They want to do their civic duty. They want to get in and out. And they know that they align with the Democratic values, and they just want to vote straight party and go on about their workday and about their business.
I don't think, the last I heard, we had not yet received from the Secretary of State's office the detailed voting files and to know what really effect this had. It seems like there was a big drop off after the Biden and then down ballot, but I haven't seen that the numbers are out yet. So it'll be, I'm sure this one will be debated for a long time. But it was.
I think some of the numbers indicated that there was drop off after the Attorney General race. So it was Biden, Josh Shapiro, and then our row offices. There was drop off there, and we didn't get the number of down ballot wins that we had expected. I thought our polling was a little bit off, but I still think we probably should have picked up a little bit more than we did pick up. So we didn't pick up anything. And it was a net -3 in the House. So it was really devastating. So I'm not sure what effects that had, but we definitely did not see the results we were expecting down ballot.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to examine all this going into the 2022 elections. I want to make sure everybody knows, if you have questions for our guests, be sure and put them in the chat. We'd be happy to answer them. And now let's move on to what happened as a result of all of this. Okay, so everybody knows what happened in early 2020, COVID hit. And so you got to remember that the bill, the 2019 bill, was all, as Nancy mentioned, it was all done without COVID in mind. This whole idea of, remember Pennsylvania, it was always, you had to have a doctor's note practically in order to vote absentee. And so what happened in 2020 is that a lot of, so then we had this new act, but a lot of the details, as Nancy said, were not really worked out. Margot's made the point that an awful lot of things were left to the county, and every county acted differently as to how they were going to do it, what they were going to do about drop boxes, and then of course there were challenges. So Margot or Nancy, which one of you wants to talk about how awful it started in 2020 election?
Margot, you always go first. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, there were problems from the beginning in terms of the interpretation of the law, even as it related to satellite offices or drop boxes. As counties that were more populous, they were very concerned that they weren't going to be able to process a lot of these mail-in ballots, and that they were concerned that that ballots were going to come back after the election or late, and there was some challenge later on, which was anticipated, that ballots that came in after the election would not be counted. So all of these things were problems, and it was really hard to execute. County officials told us afterwards the different processes. There was the absentee ballots, which had its own process that they were used to, and then the no excuse mail-in ballots that they had to process. And they were sort of on slightly different timetables because they had already started the absentee ballot process when we were still fiddling around with Act 77 in September. And for us to execute it during a presidential election where we know we're going to have twice the amount of turnout, or sometimes 4 times as the amount of turnout as in odd years, was just, to me, also a recipe for disaster.
And another thing is, and I don't know, well, I'm sure the Republicans won't vote for anything that would improve this. The deadline to get to apply is only a week before the election. And that's not enough time, especially in this last election when the mail was, I would say, purposely slowed down. You can't send, it's not enough time for the county to receive it, get it back to you, and then you send it in. That made it extremely difficult. That's a part of the law that I wish could be changed. I think it's fair to say, Margot, correct, that they're not going to try to make anything better?
They're going to try to make things worse under this mantra that they have going on, which I'm trying to turn around the mantra. That they say that they're going to make it easy to vote and hard to cheat, but actually they're making it easy to cheat and hard to vote. So that's what they're doing.
And I just want to say one other thing. Maybe this, well, it's going to be important for everything moving forward. The fact that you can start to vote by mail 50 days before the election, at least legally, although they don't seem to get the ballots to us that early, actually changes the way people have to campaign and have to run, because you have to get your message out much earlier. And as an example, this year we're going to have 4 questions about the constitutional amendments. And I heard we're going to get our ballots around April 15th, and people aren't even aware of the amendments yet. So all kinds of things have to change because of mail-in voting.
Yeah, I think some of the things that were interesting during the 2020 election were how much control the individual counties had going towards the, Nancy's comment earlier about why your local elections are so important. But I vote in Philadelphia, and I had gotten my mail-in ballot, and I went to City Hall to drop it off before they had official drop boxes. And what I thought was fascinating was a number of people in line to get a mail-in ballot so that they could fill it in and drop it off right away. So that's kind of a different version of early voting that happened. Some counties allowed that, some did not. Some counties, I was working for the PA Dems voter hotline, and the questions from all the different counties, and you'd find out that in some counties there was one drop box that was within inside a building, and you had to go during the daytime to turn in your ballot if you wanted to drop it off and not trust the mail. And in other counties, there were drop boxes in a number of locations across the county. Was it the intent when the law was passed to give all the counties that much control, or was it just not thought of as this election law was changed in 2019?
Usually county officials have some degree of latitude for elections. So I like to say that the election was largely uniform based on how Pennsylvania executes its elections, because election officials in the various counties do have some wide-ranging latitude about how they're going to execute it based on their population and based on their experience. We also had the unfortunate occurrence because of COVID that many experienced election officials left. There was wholesale resignations all across the Commonwealth. And so we were left with a lot of new election officials that were trying to learn new laws in a very short period of time, and also understand the previous laws and the previous timetables. So it really was a challenge.
And I understand that some counties were, quote, curing their ballots, allowing people to cure their ballots. So there were a few counties I heard that, going back to your point earlier, that some counties started counting the ballots, at 8 a.m. on election day. And then when they would open it up, they would see that there was a missing signature or some other problem. And they were calling the voter to say, hey, would you like to come in and fix your ballot? And other counties, if going to your point, that they were didn't open them up to the next day, they weren't given that. So it was just a hodgepodge of what was going on. And as I said, I knew a lot about this because on election day, I'm answering the phone and trying to figure out what advice to give to voters who weren't sure what to do next.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was only a couple counties that that didn't open ballots until the next day. So those were really problematic. But most of the counties did offer, even we found out in the hearings, even the reddest counties offered voters an opportunity to make administrative fixes. Nobody was able to change their votes, but they were able to make administrative fixes to signatures or dates or missing year, or if they put their birth date as opposed to the day's date that was mailed, those kinds of errors. What couldn't be cured if there was no secrecy envelope, or actually the ballot, you couldn't change your vote. Republicans were using this term ballot curing as if people were actually changing their votes, and that didn't occur anywhere.
But as Meg Pritchard points out in our chat, that was one of the reasons for one of the lawsuits, or one of the discussions in one of the many lawsuits, was that this was going on and clearly unconstitutional, but not. But that was all part of the arguments and the discussion that were going on. There were a lot of, it was a very confusing day altogether, where lawsuits flying, people having discussions, different counties doing different things, and then the slow results. And as you all know, part of some of the confusion that our former president has put out there was that he was winning at the time when the elections booths closed on election day, and then all these other ballots came in and were clearly unconstitutional, when in fact many of the ballots that came in had already been received, they just hadn't been counted yet. And so it all went to creating this massive amount of confusion on election day. And the lawsuits didn't help. What was it like, Margot, on your committee and in Harrisburg when all this discussion was going on?
Well, the committee hearings, there have been 14 of them, probably something like 42 hours of discussion on the 2020 election. They were calling it a deep dive into the 2020 election and election law in Pennsylvania. But really, it's what I call a deep mockery of our election officials and the heroic job that they did in executing and administering our election across the board, I would say across all of Pennsylvania. So even in the red counties, I think all the election officials did an amazing job with the timelines that they had, and trying to figure out the new law that was, poorly drafted in some instances, and in all of these different changes. So we've had a number of election officials. We've had officials from across the country as we looked at other states. And the result is really what we already knew. We had it was a free, fair, and accurate election. The results are without question, despite 63 lawsuits. The results are what the results are. And so they're just using the hearings now to be able to enact legislation that nobody asked for in the hearings, except for a couple of really right-wing activists from the Heritage Foundation that came in and testified. One blatantly lied under oath. But those are just some of the kinds of things that they do in Harrisburg.
And I just want to say, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but
that's okay. Preach away, Nancy. Preach away.
There actually was no confusion about the results. It was just created confusion and fake confusion. No one's winning at any time until the election's over. That's the first thing. You can be ahead at different times or behind. And that was all planned, way ahead of time of what was going to happen. In truth, from everything I saw, and my main contacts were Christine Ruther in Delaware County and Valor Cush in Montgomery County, we did an amazing job under very trying circumstances, and they did everything that they could do to keep it completely on the up and up, because they knew there would be lawsuits. I know that in Montgomery County, we had a guard at each drop box. Everything had to be within line of sight. They were so careful about every single thing they did, and all the rest was just a big game. all the things that they're doing in all the states, pretending it's about election integrity, is just a lie. There was no problem. They've proven this over and over again. So their motive is not to make anything, better or more honest.
Absolutely. I think that, and Margot, I appreciated that you threw in the comment that there were 63 lawsuits.
Yeah.
I mean, that cost the Commonwealth millions of dollars to go defend these, and they were all thrown out. I also appreciated the fact, you cited a couple of the county officials, Nancy. I also was very proud of our now former Secretary of State, Kathy Bookbar. I think she presented a very calm, clear analysis. She was on the news quite a bit, talking about there's no problems in Pennsylvania. We have it under control. When something comes up, we answer it, and we're defending all these lawsuits. So again, I think that we had good leadership, but then there's just a lot of confusion and
Yeah, and they really tried to skewer her while she was still in office, and bringing her before the committee over and over again, attacking the guidance that she put out as if it wasn't her job to create policy and to go along with law, the statute that was enacted, and that as if that was something unusual. And it was just really refreshing, I must say, even in the reddest counties in Pennsylvania, Snyder County, and other ruby red counties, they really defended the Secretary of State and the office, and talked about how supportive they were in helping them to understand the new law and getting all these new election officials up to speed on what they had to do and what was in the statute, and what leeway they had in their counties. So she was, she was actually defended by even the reddest county officials in terms of the guidance and the support from the Secretary of State's office in helping them maneuver through the election process.
Yeah, she's passionate about voting laws and people getting the right to vote, but also just very clear and focused on making sure it was done right. So I'm happy she was in charge during 2020. And she also worked very closely with Josh Shapiro on a lot of the lawsuits that came against the Commonwealth. So, okay, let's move on. Let's talk about, there are a lot of comments in the chat that have to do with what happens next. So let's see the next slide, Jamie. And then, so some of the questions we've been hearing are we going to have more difficulty with mail-in ballots this time because we still have such a charming gentleman in charge of the U.S. Post Office and things don't seem to be getting any better? Oh yes, it took 6 weeks for me to mail a package from Philadelphia to Denver. So I'm well aware of this one. How are the counties going to execute new ways to vote? We have, there was a lot of national funding that came into the state that provided things like, do you remember the commercials about no naked ballots? There were a lot of funding that came in to make sure that people understood how to vote, but is that available in the 2021 elections? And by the way, we shouldn't forget that all these lawsuits cost the Commonwealth millions of dollars that we could have put into all kinds of other things. So what's going on, Margot? Are you got your boxing gloves on and are we fighting this one or what's happening?
Well, it's just so interesting. A lot of the proposed legislation that the Republicans are putting forward, there's 24, 25 last count that have been proposed.
What are they doing?
They're putting forward proposals that have nothing to do with the outcomes of the election. I mean, the outcomes of the hearing, because all the county officials reported that they executed a free, fair, and accurate election. What they've asked for is an ability to pre-canvass. They've asked for additional resources in order to execute the election process, and they've asked for adjusted timeline so they have time to send out the mail-in ballots, so they have time to receive them back. So they've asked for adjustment to some of these timelines.
And are these both
That's
red
not at all.
counties and blue counties?
In red counties and blue counties, they wanted an adjustment of the timelines so that they would have time to mail out the absentee or mail-in voting. They also asked for uniformity so that they didn't have two different systems that they had to work through: the absentee ballot, the absentee mail-in voting, and the no excuse mail-in voting. So of the proposals that I've seen very little that deals with that. And I seem that there's a resistance to allow pre-canvassing, but they want to do voter ID laws. You know, some of the strictest voter ID laws. I mean, a lot of states do have voter ID laws, but the best states that still provide for access have a lot of different types of ID, including a piece of mail that you can present if you don't have a driver's license. Pennsylvania is looking to do the strictest type of voter ID. They're also looking to eliminate any third-party resources. They're not talking about providing additional resources for these hardworking election officials, but they're talking about eliminating private resources, as opposed to what election officials ask for is some way to identify if somebody's being mailed a mail-in ballot from a third party, to identify it the same way you identify campaign material, who's paying for it, and so forth. But they're not talking about doing that. They just want to eliminate third-party voting. And one of the testifiers that I had to challenge, that he was under oath and he had made some inaccurate and erroneous statements under oath, and I had to remind him that he was under oath, was from the Heritage Foundation, who claimed that there were this Zuckerbucks, quote unquote, that caused, you know, counties to flip blue, and the name Philadelphia, and said that, you know, Philadelphia went for Biden because of these Zuckerbucks. And I said, you know, Philadelphia has been reliably blue for the last half century. So I have no idea what you're talking about. And then he said, and it was also a result of drive-by voting in Philadelphia. And I was like, there was no drive-by voting, sir. And I want to remind you again that you're under oath, and you cannot make wild, you know, claims here in a legal proceeding. So it was just ridiculous madness.
So I love the story you just shared, Margo. That first of all, the counties have come back and said, hey, we're really proud of how we ran these elections. Given the circumstances and the last minute election law changes, we did a bang up job, but here's some things that would make it easier for us. And these are counties from across the Commonwealth, red, blue. They appreciated the guidance from the Secretary of State, but they needed some additional things from the legislature. And that's what they asked for. Those are changes that are needed. Those are problems in need of solutions. Instead, what you're saying is that the legislature is dictating or wants to dictate solutions to things that weren't problems. And they want to go after things that were not issues. Have you come up with any, or have you heard about real election fraud at all?
No, once again, there was no evidence of election fraud. I mean, you know, I've pushed back pretty hard, and you know, they've tried to silence me, but apparently the chairman had never met me before. You don't silence Margo Davidson. So, you know, so I've been saying these things to them, and you know, repeating that it was a free, fair, and accurate election. So the last hearing, they started making these wild claims about 20,000 dead people that are on the voter rolls, and that's already been refuted. And there's like 5 or 6 different processes to eliminate people off of the voter rolls that are deceased or may have moved. So Pennsylvania is really a leader in making sure that the voter registration rolls are accurate. But they, you know, since they weren't able to find any fraud, they start making these wild claims about dead people on the registration rolls, but none of those dead people voted. They have no evidence of that. But, you know, they want to claim that, you know, there's widespread fraud and cheating. And one of the security officials that they brought in to testify which I thought was really magnanimous, talked about, he was a cybersecurity expert, and he talked about the interference in the election, and that he said that local elected officials had a role to play in making sure that these wild, unsubstantiated claims did not gain traction because people trust them in their communities, and that local officials could go a long way in refuting misleading claims. And that was also their role to play in making sure that we had cybersecurity in our elections. And they just shuffled in their seats, but then they just, went ahead with their nefarious claims.
And they are saying these are solutions. They're not solutions. They're what you have on this slide. They're attacks, and they're ways to curtail people's right to vote. That's absolutely all they are. And it's interesting because one of the reasons they're using in Georgia for the laws that they're enacting is because they said people don't have confidence in the election, so we have to do these laws to make them more confident. Well, they don't have confidence in the election because the people who want to write these laws created the lie that
Exactly.
so that it's like a vicious circle. We're going to tell all these lies to get people confused, to make them less confident, and then we're going to put in these laws pretending that that's the reason. And it's really very purposeful and thus far fairly effective.
Well, I think that what you're both illustrating is also the need for us to pay attention to local news, whether it's local news, TV news, or newspapers, or social media, but paying attention to what people are saying and being sure to challenge these things, because these things, they get out there and everybody's worrying about the 20,000 people, the dead people on the voting rolls, and if we don't challenge it, I know, Nancy, you've got a program going to help train people on how to do op-eds for exactly that reason, is that we need to get op-eds and letters to the editor.
Right. I did start a letters to the editor. It's a pilot program. What we're writing about right now are these the limits to the emergency powers that the governor has, because that's going to be on the May 18th primary. But we're going to expand it, and we're going to work on things, not just op-eds, because only a very select group of people read op-eds, but we're going to expand it to grassroots people doing more social media posts. We need to do things like make sure Pennsylvanians, first of all, understand how important state government is, because most people do not understand it.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to try to do a lot of work on making sure people understand how amazing the American Rescue Plan was. And then we're going to work a lot on letting them know how they'll benefit in terms of jobs, et cetera, with the new jobs plan.
So Nancy, how do people from all over the state get to take advantage of your training?
I guess I have to work a little harder inviting them.
Just let us know.
I don't know if that's possible.
What the link is to sign up, and we will increase your Zoom capabilities.
We've had 2 trainings so far, and I am going to expand it and ask groups like yours to push the next one we're going to have. But we've already gotten 3 letters into the Inquirer about this, which is pretty amazing in a very short time. And we're trying to get it in papers all across the state, including a lot of rural areas. So I hope it'll be a good thing.
Well, one of the, Represent is clearly a PAC that raises money for women, and we know that's our charter. But in electing women, we also know that raising awareness of issues, raising awareness of what happens in Harrisburg, and really helping citizens to be activists is going to make all the difference in the world. And we're so lucky to have Nancy as an activist, and really lucky to have Margot. I loved your comment earlier when somebody said something and you challenged them, they don't know Margot. And I thought, that's right. And that's why we're lucky. Hey, do we expect to get any support? I don't know what's happening on what was HR 1 is now Senate 1, but we're sure it's going to get, filibustered. Do we expect to get any relief from that? Would that help us in Pennsylvania?
It would help us because they want to protect voting rights. It would be this century's voting rights bill. So we're hoping that we can convince Manchin and some of the other more conservative Democrats to support the bill. I know there's been a number of conversations between the Georgia senator. I always mispronounce his name, so I don't want to say it. But the newly elected Black Georgia senator has reportedly had a number of conversations with Joe Manchin about why this is so important and why this is more important than any Senate rules or protecting the filibuster. This is protecting fundamental rights to vote. That is under attack. It's really a defense of democracy, not the defense of Senate rules that's more important. So I think there's some signs that his voice is being heard in those conversations with Manchin in particular is being heard. So we'll see, how it goes. I mean, he does represent, one of the reddest states in the nation. So, I understand that he wants to represent his constituents, but his constituents also deserve free and fair and accurate elections.
Thank you for that. I think Raphael Warnock is one of the clearest
Exactly
on this whole subject because he's been through it all in Georgia. So
sure.
Interesting discussion. Nancy, you were on a call last night talking about what might be happening.
Yeah, I do want to just say something. HR 1 is an amazing bill. And the Brennan Center for Justice said that it would, if it passed, it would get rid of almost 100% of these state laws. It would supersede it. So that would be amazing. And it is about voting rights. It's about making sure every state has early voting, automatic registration. It has amazing provisions there. It's about transparency in terms of money to elections and ethics. But one thing that I did learn last night about HR 1 itself is it talks about redistricting. And this is really important because it explained that if states do their congressional redistricting in the wrong way, that by itself can ruin democracy. And this bill covers that. And then I want to just say that from everything that Mitch McConnell himself says, we're not going to get any Republican votes on HR 1, which is disgraceful and would not have happened, even 10 years ago, in my opinion. But so it's only by getting rid of the filibuster that we will be able to pass HR 1. And I've been a little discouraged. Connor Lamb, I was on a call. Connor Lamb had an event and Joe Manchin was the guest speaker. And he just kept talking about bipartisanship. And he just hopes that Democrats have dinner with Republicans. And I just kept thinking, like, we can eat with them a lot and they're not going to vote for this bill. But anyway, the call last night said that there are some, quote, squishy Democrats, but the only two who so far they're worried about are Kristen Sinema in Arizona and Joe Manchin. And this is the deal. They were much more optimistic than I thought. They feel that Manchin is really committed to bipartisanship philosophy, but then when push comes to shove, because he hasn't signed on to the jobs plan either, the Build Back Better thing, that he is going to say, am I more committed to bipartisanshipness or the welfare of West Virginians, and that in the end, he will come around. And the only other thing I want to say about this is people are misguided. I hear people say, well, let's just like call him out and let's primary him. That's completely not going to work. If anything done to him will just get us a Republican in West Virginia. And he is needed. And they're trying to appeal to his better nature. I can send to you, there are some organizations working really hard in West Virginia to get the citizens to tell him to change their mind. And they were very, very optimistic, which made me feel better.
Wow, I hope everybody appreciates the special insights we've gotten today from our special guests. I think that I've learned a lot. These are issues that affect all of us who we read about, but it's just wonderful having the insights, the behind the scenes discussions of what's going on, and knowing that these two strong women are part of this movement to help protect the voting rights of all Pennsylvanians. So thank you, Margot. Thank you, Nancy. It's just been an incredible conversation. And keep fighting the good fight, and let us know if there's something we should be advertising on our social media also, because nothing gets better in Pennsylvania without good citizen activists. So thank you.
And I just wanted to say quickly that when you asked about an activist in Pennsylvania that I might want to have on this panel with me, I couldn't think of anyone other than Nancy, who is a force to be reckoned with. And if anyone wants to be more active in making sure that our voting rights are protected, your advocacy and your work with Represent PAC is important, and grassroots work with Nancy Kleinberg and people like her. Although I don't know anyone that works as hard as Nancy for no money whatsoever on a cause, you definitely want to connect to activists that are on the front lines of defending our democracy. And Nancy Kleinberg is the best.
Oh, Nancy's great on a lot of issues. She's the one I go to, and when I see something going on and I'm wondering why something is happening in a certain way in our elections, I send Nancy a note and I go, am I crazy or ... And then she usually agrees with me. So then she reminds me that I'm not crazy. We'll send Nancy, how do people contact you if they want to be, on your mailing list, or
anybody can just email me at Nancy Kleinberg 1, the number 1, Nancy Kleinberg 1@gmail.com. I'll add you to everything. And I want to just quickly say that I got involved because my initial group adopted Jennifer O'Mara state campaign. And in 2018, I became her finance director too. We flipped the most Republican seat that we flipped. And I met Margot for the first time because she was a mentor to Jen, and she came to the very first fundraiser I held for Jen, and she has been supportive in every way since then. And I also want everyone to know we're already working hard on 2022 state house races, figuring out what things we could improve upon and how we can do things better, and how to get out there this summer and start early and be optimistic.
That's great. For those who were on our last call, we were discussing a proposed bill for equity in pay. And we had 3 of our state representatives on that call, and Jen O'Mara was one of them. So we're all big supporters of hers also. Okay, I just want to remind everybody, you got to be following what's going on in the legislature. Big bucks are flowing into Pennsylvania because of the Recovery Act. We hope the infrastructure program will also bring a lot of money into Pennsylvania, into so many necessary things, including broadband for all of our rural counties, and education funding and childcare funding and all these kind of things. Keep following these people in the state legislature, because it makes me nervous to think that they're, no offense, Margot, but it makes me nervous to think that some of these legislators are going to get to control how spending is done. So keep paying attention. Future events, on Friday, April 30th, we're going to send out, I think the announcement is out, but we have a senator and 2 of our state reps who are going to talk about water. How did water and the quality of our water and the safety of our water get to be a political issue? And it is an issue throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, both in the cities and in the rural counties, both because of fracking and mining and things like that, but also because of our heavy industrial base and what people, including pharmaceutical companies, have been dumping into our water for decades. And what should be done about it? How are we paying attention to it? And we have 3 of our passionate representatives and a senator in the legislature going to talk about water. And in early May, I'm just confirming the date where Senator Madeline Dean is going to be talking to us about her growth from working in the state legislature to working in Congress. And it should be another exciting event. So once again, I want to thank everybody for their attention. I want to thank you for coming out on a rainy, miserable, miserable for me, but Monday morning. I want to thank our 2 guests for appearing with us this morning. And I hope that starting your week with Represent is going to, supercharge you for all the other things that are going on. So, yeah. Thank you, everybody. We're all in this together, and together we can make Pennsylvania better. Thank you.